You guys have all heard me talk about the benefits of turmeric. You've heard me talk about how anti-inflammatory it is. You've heard me talk about how it can increase your energy levels and a myriad of other health benefits. But I haven't gone into a whole lot of detail in how turmeric can actually help you burn fat and actually help your insulin levels. Now, to understand how turmeric works in this capacity, I have to explain a little bit more about insulin and how insulin works in the way of fat loss. You see, every time we eat something, particularly a carbohydrate or a protein, our pancreas secretes insulin. Now, I've talked about this in other videos. I've talked about how if you're constantly eating, your pancreas is constantly secreting insulin. And when your pancreas is constantly secreting insulin, it doesn't get a chance to recharge and rebuild enough insulin for the next meal. So what can happen is you can actually become somewhat insulin resistant, which means that your blood sugar is going to remain elevated and it's going to be that much easier to store fat. It's also going to be that much easier to become a type 2 diabetic, and obviously we don't want that. So I want to explain how the body works in a little bit more detail before I explain how you can specifically use turmeric to help lower your blood sugar and ultimately help your fat loss goals. You see, we have to look at the counterpart to insulin, and that is something called glucagon. So let me explain it with kind of an example. Let's say you eat lunch and you have a fair bit of carbohydrates with lunch. Let's just say you have a sandwich, for instance. Okay, you eat the sandwich, and then about an hour or 2 hours later, those insulin levels that were secreted and elevated after you consumed that meal begin to come down. You see, insulin stays in your body for about 2 to 3 hours depending on the individual and depending on how insulin sensitive you are. So 2 or 3 hours down the line after eating that sandwich, your body creates something called glucagon. And what glucagon is more or less the opposite of insulin. What glucagon does is tells your liver that the insulin levels are beginning to drop and that the liver needs to release stored glucose from either the muscles or the liver to begin to elevate the blood sugar again, simply because you don't have that dietary carbohydrate, that dietary glucose flowing through the bloodstream. Now, what can also happen with this is it also triggers your liver to release free fatty acids and ketones. That is when fat burning takes place. Now, you might remember my video how I talk about how snacking can actually reduce the rate of fat loss. Well, it's simply because of this mechanism. You need to have glucagon in order for your body to be able to burn fat. If your insulin levels are constantly elevated, your body is never really able to release those free fatty acids out of the adipose tissue or wherever they need to be released from to give you that energy that is effectively using body fat as energy. Well, where exactly does turmeric come into place? Well, turmeric comes into place because it has been shown to dramatically reduce your blood sugar levels, specifically when taken with a meal. So what this means is that rather than having your insulin levels elevated for 2 to 3 hours after a meal, it can be brought down to 1 to 2 hours, meaning you have a larger fat loss window simply by using turmeric. In fact, a recent study by Molecular Food and Nutrition found that those that had diabetes or chronically high levels of blood sugar that added curcumin, which is turmeric, to every meal of the day for 6 weeks had a reduction by 30 to 40% in their overall blood sugar. Now that is a pretty dramatic response. When you couple that kind of lowering of blood sugar along with the right kind of diet, the right kind of meal timing, and of course the right kind of exercise, you can exponentially increase the amount of body fat that you burn. So now we get to the real question. When do you add turmeric? Where do you add turmeric? Where are you going to get the most bang for the buck, so to speak? Well, I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to hypothesize based on something that I already know. Okay, a lot of times when I'm working with clients or I'm working with people, I explain to them that you want to have at least one meal that has a relatively long gap between the next meal. So for example, that same sandwich with lunch, for instance. I want you to try to take a little bit of a longer gap between lunch and dinner, because you're going to have a period of time where your body can actually burn some fat, where glucagon can be released and your body can start burning those free fatty acids. So again, if we go back to that example that I originally talked about, where you have that sandwich at 12 and your insulin levels are dropping around 2 or 3 p.m., well, imagine if you added turmeric with that meal. If you added turmeric with that meal, your insulin levels would be suppressed around 1 or 2 p.m. versus 2 to 3 p.m., essentially giving you an extra hour of fat burning through that longer window. Now, if you're eating every 2 or 3 hours, the effect is somewhat minimal. So I encourage you to use your turmeric whenever you're going to have a longer gap. Now, this also applies if you're intermittent fasting. Maybe you're about to go on a 16-hour window where you really want to maximize the effects of fat burning. You really want to maximize the hormone effects. Well, add some turmeric to that last meal before you start the fasting phase, and you can gain an extra 1 to 2 hours of glucagon response and ultimately some fat burning. Now, I know that's more detail than you ever wanted to know about turmeric, but as always, I'm here to help you get the best possible body and be the best possible version of yourself in the office, in the workplace, at home, and of course, in the gym. Keep it locked in here on my videos. I'll see you in the next one.